I'd like to beg to move on behalf of the Petitions Committee that this House has considered e-petition 229178 relating to starting the school day later for teenagers. Now, I'd like to start by reading the petition. School should start at 10 a.m. as teenagers are too tired. Teenagers are so tired due to having to wake up very early to get to school. The government should require secondary schools to start later, which will lead to increased productivity at school. Mrs. May, one of the things I love about the Petitions Committee is that very often the petitions we receive are very direct and to the point. No political beating about the bush, no on one hand or on the other hand. This goes straight to the point. Teenagers are tired, so school should start later. And it's achieved huge cut-through, huge public interest in this, and that's why it's such a pleasure to open the debate today. And over the next few minutes, I plan to lay out some of the scientific evidence that backs up this call. I shall say a little about the huge number of responses we've had, many from teenagers themselves, from parents, from schools. I shall report a little on the responses from my own city of Cambridge. I shall say a little about the practical challenges and wider implications and some of the possible benefits around the travel issues. And I have to say, when I started writing this speech, I was tempted to conclude in time-honoured fashion with a politician's reply of yes, maybe, because sadly these things are always more complicated than one might imagine. But I have to say, the more I've read about this, the more I find myself agreeing with the petitioners. And let me begin by praising the initiator of the petition. It was started by Hannah Kidner, a teenager doing her A-levels at Blundell's School in Devon, and she's here with us today in the gallery. And I would say that this petition is a great example of people-powered democracy. It was started just 3 months ago, and it's already garnered over 180,000 signatures, proving that there are other issues than our future relationship with the European Union to stir the passions. Let me start by setting out the legal position as it stands today, and I'd like to thank the House of Commons Library staff for their excellent briefing, which informs much of my speech. Currently, academies and free schools set their own school days and term dates with their board and head teacher. Local authority maintained schools decide the length of a school day with session times and breaks, but must open for 190 days during a school year, and the school year must start after July. Which means that there is scope for local decision-making rather than government issuing an edict. Now, personally, I'm not very fond of academies as a structure, and so-called free schools even less. But they do all receive public money, so my guess is that should a future government wish to act, it could do so, because it holds the purse strings. On the other hand, it's also always convenient, of course, for governments to delegate decisions which they consider tricky, and more of that later. Now, the issue of starting times is an issue which has been considered at various points over recent years, with strong feelings on both sides of the debate. And I'm not an education or neurological development expert, but I'm told that there have been many studies across the world over the years, particularly in the US, that suggest a later start time may have a positive impact on pupils. Some reviews have found, however, more mixed results, and there are some who have raised concerns about the quality of the evidence. In Singapore, it was found that a school with a delayed start time had a positive impact after 9 months, while a study in Canada found that, quote, students from schools that started later slept longer, were more likely to meet sleep recommendations, and were less likely to report feeling tired in the morning. The authors claim that, quote, the study adds weight to the mounting evidence that delaying school start time benefits adolescent sleep. Canadian researchers claim that letting teens start school just 10 minutes later each day might help them get more than 20 minutes extra sleep on a typical night. While that might not sound like much, for some sleep-deprived adolescents, this might be enough of a difference to help them get the minimum recommended 8 hours of sleep a night. Lead author of a study into this issue, Karen Patty of Brock University in Ontario, said, quote, our body's circadian clock naturally shifts later at puberty, so teens get tired later at night due to later melatonin release, and therefore need to sleep in longer in the morning in order to get sufficient rest. Delayed school start times have been recommended for adolescents to align with their delayed sleep schedules. Generally, though, it is thought that further exploration of this evidence is required. One study, called Delayed School Start Times and Adolescent Sleep, a systematic review of the experimental evidence, says that in their study, quote, school start times were delayed 25 to 60 minutes, and correspondingly, total sleep time increased from 25 to 77 minutes per weeknight. Some studies revealed reduced daytime sleepiness, depression, caffeine use, tardiness to class, and trouble staying awake. Overall, the evidence supports recent non-experimental study findings and calls for policy that advocates for delayed school start time to improve sleep. This presents a potential long-term solution to chronic sleep restriction during adolescence. However, it goes on to say that, quote, there is a need for rigorous randomised study designs and reporting of consistent outcomes, including objective sleep measures and consistent measures of health and academic performance. I'm particularly grateful to Harriet Sherwood, who wrote an excellent piece of The Guardian a few weeks ago, highlighting some of the issues underlying this debate. She says that sleep experts are warning of an epidemic of sleep deprivation amongst school-aged children, with some urging educational authorities to alter school hours to allow adolescents to stay in bed longer. Adequate sleep is the strongest factor in the well-being and mental health of teenagers, and a shortage is linked to poor educational results, anxiety and obesity. In fact, the French Education Minister recently approved a proposal to push back by an hour the start of the school day, although that was to 9 a.m. for students aged 15 to 18 in Paris. And scientists say that humans' circadian rhythms, the body clock that manages the cycle of sleep and wakefulness, change in adolescence. The cycle shifts 2 hours in teenagers, which means that they are wired to go to sleep and wake up later. It's like they're in a different time zone, said Dr. Michael Farquhar, a consultant in paediatric sleep medicine at the Evelina Children's Hospital in London. We're asking them to get up before their body clock is ready, because that's the way the adult world works. So most teenagers end up sleep deprived. Sleep is the strongest predictor of well-being among teenagers, said Russell Viner, Professor of Adolescent Health at University College London and President of the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health. So, Mrs. Mayne, there are strong scientific reasons for considering change. But beyond just a simple corroboration of teenage brain development and sleep patterns and the impact that this may have on school results, it's important to recognise that schools are more than just exam factories, something which I'm afraid successive governments have needed to be reminded about. I and many others, I suspect most would agree, that schools are key parts of communities and play a key role in family life, and a change to the school day would have to be considered as part of this.
Would the Honourable...
I'm very happy to give way to both, but I'll give way to the other side first.
Please, ladies first.
Well, I'm not sure I'm going to go for that, but I'll go for my honourable friend.
I thank the Honourable Member for making a very fantastic speech. Would he also agree with me and the British Medical Journal that actually delaying the time that children finish school is a very important part? And to your point, to the Honourable Member's part in terms of them being safe and being part of a local community, actually making sure that our children stay in school between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m. is massively shown to reduce the potential of knife crime taking place during those hours.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I think one of the difficulties, I will come on to this, is of course starting later may well mean finishing later, and there are pros and cons, but I will come on to that in a moment. She makes an important point about safety. I give way to the member opposite.
I thank him very much for giving way. Isn't one of the things that research has shown is that one of the things that needs to be limited is the amount of time that people can use screens, whether that's their phone or their iPads. And actually, by limiting that, you can have a big effect on the person's attentiveness during class.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for making that point. I think there's been some good research recently suggesting this, particularly in the hours immediately before sleep. There are a range of issues here in terms of how we boost the quality of life for young people. This, I would fully admit, is only one of those aspects. And as I've said, Mrs. Mayne, I'm not an expert, but I do represent Cambridge, and there are quite a few experts in Cambridge, so I know people who are. And sensibly, I would suggest I've sought their advice, and I've been particularly grateful to local head teachers of the sixth form colleges of Hills Road, Long Road, the secondary schools of Coleridge, Netherall, Parkside, the Academy for Science and Technology, and more. And I've been very struck by the alacrity and the sensible responses, thoughtful responses I've received from all those institutions. Really well considered, well thought through, and of course pointing out both the advantages and the potential pitfalls. And my suspicion is that any member asking their local colleges and schools across the country would get a similarly well-considered response. There were plenty of positives that Cambridge head teachers and principals mentioned, and particularly for staff, it could provide opportunities for childcare relief, allowing teachers more time with their children in the mornings, which could in turn, of course, help improve recruitment and retention, which in an area like mine is a key issue. I have to say, a lot of people pointed out that starting later could seriously reduce some of the traffic problems which are so acute, particularly in university cities like Cambridge. And a delay to the start of the school day for teenagers could really make a substantial change to the public transport peaks. Many of us notice outside term time how different it is trying to get in and out of Cambridge. One local head teacher told me that he thought this could only work, though, if it was coordinated across the system. He says that is the big issue, as with the current term structure, because of the need to coordinate with primary schools on childcare, working patterns of parents who are by and large working 9 to 5, it's hard for individual institutions to step outside the norm. And that's a point that is well made. I agree with the coordination point, although I have to say I'm less convinced that everyone still works 9 to 5 these days. And I note that better employers are introducing more family-friendly, flexible working, and that should be encouraged. And I think that could be part of the answer in staggering school start times. Let me look at some of the downsides, because although the merits of across-the-board change may be positive from an organisational perspective, there is also the case that the context of the school in question is key. Another Cambridge head, who I think had experience from a previous posting, said although this change to starting later has worked well at Portsmouth College, it's very context dependent as a standalone solution. And quite clearly, different communities have different requirements and preferences, and any change must take that into account. And there's also the question of the impact on the wider community and the family. Many parents who do the school run on their way to work may find a later start disruptive. And there's also the question of at what age this would best suit students. For instance, some parents who currently allow their children to walk home alone may feel uncomfortable with a school day shift starting at 10 o'clock, which could mean returning later in the afternoon or early evening, which could potentially mean 11-year-olds travelling home in the dark in winter. And there are some who quite clearly might not feel comfortable with this. Very happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend, and obviously he's making an excellent speech. I mean, you cannot exonerate the parents. Now, for good or bad, I've got 2 grammar schools. I've got children coming to those grammar schools in Stroud from the other side of Swindon. That means those children, 11-year-olds, are having to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So as much as we can talk about putting the school day back to 10, at the moment, some children's day at 11 is going from 5, and by the time they finish their homework, it's probably at least 9 o'clock. That cannot be good for children, can it? And we need to look at some idea of what is an accessible school, rather than just let, if you like, the free market go mad and let parents make choice.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I think many of us would continue to make the argument for a good local school in every area. Parental choice sometimes leads to some quite difficult journeys, as my honourable friend has explained, for children. Maybe the choice that people make, but the impact it has on those children, I think, may not be as positive as one might wish. It's not just children and parents, of course, it's teachers also, who, many of whom are working very long hours already. They may prefer to finish earlier in the day, not have a longer, later working day, because they've still got more to do when the day finishes. And of course, it could also be complicated for families who have children at both primary and secondary school. Could also potentially impact on extracurricular activities after school, particularly in winter, when inter-school sports games could be impacted due to darkness. And of course, there are other voluntary sessions that happen after school as well: exam revision, music classes, community outreach, and more. So a range of potential pitfalls. And, of course, just looking slightly more widely, others in the world do things differently, as I've already made reference to. There have been changes in school start times in other countries. In fact, some of our European neighbours start their days even earlier. Some run from 7 until 1. To some extent, of course, that also depends on the local climate. But I think what this all shows is that this is a very complicated range of issues. Now, complexity isn't always understood by everyone, let's say. There are some, of course, who have characterised this debate as somehow being about lazy teenagers. I was on Radio Cambridges's excellent morning programme this morning with Thordis Friedrichsen, and I'm told that many people who contacted the radio show showed little sympathy for what they described as sleepy teenagers, and they thought that getting up on time was good practice for the world of work. Now, I think that's a pretty unsympathetic view, and I would just say to people of my generation and older that maybe we should try and remember what it was like for us when we were teenagers. And I'm afraid that sometimes similar grouchiness can be found in some of our national media, which just maybe could be dominated by grumpy old men from a certain background. But maybe I'm stereotyping too. Having said that, some teachers have also questioned whether by accommodating difference we would risk undermining the work ethic. One teacher told me she was concerned. By starting later at school, perhaps we're not training our young people to be up and ready for a job, which would often be likely to start earlier. I have to say to her, I'm not that sympathetic to that view and would suggest that better employers are generally more open to flexible working. But I do recognise that there are jobs that have to be done at particular times, and I guess many of us have been frustrated by colleagues who've struggled to get to work on time, Mrs. Main. Not always teenagers, of course, but there are always extenuating circumstances, indeed. Moving on to the more detailed practicalities, I think the evidence also shows that the term teenagers perhaps doesn't do justice to the complexity of the issue, because what works for older teenagers may not be so beneficial for younger people. It was pointed out to me by a local head teacher that although there is some, quote, evidence that for 14 to 18-year-olds a later start to school is beneficial, however, the same is not necessarily true for 11 to 13-year-olds. This introduces a bit of a dilemma, as meeting the needs of all would mean extending school hours and so adding costs. Given that we are currently unable to meet our costs due to inadequate funding, a point I think she wanted me particularly relate to the Minister, any move in this direction would be impossible to deliver within our existing resources. And perhaps, particularly for state schools, I'd say this is a key point. I suspect that the proper funding of education is the main issue for almost every state school, so questions about timing of the school day probably come lower than that in their priority lists. And although this debate is not party political, I would just highlight the difference that sufficient funding would make to schools to give them the ability to experiment to find what suits them best would arguably lead to the best outcome from this debate. Let me conclude these opening remarks by just saying a little about the public response to the debate. As I've said, there's been huge interest. The Petitions Committee clerks have engaged with the public on this matter, and I have to say they've done an excellent job. Last week they surveyed nearly 5,000 people, 92% of whom identified themselves as secondary school students. I have to say they were much more enthusiastic about change. The key themes that emerged touched on the academic research I've mentioned, the effects on family life, on transport, on potential mental health benefits, on the potential challenges for teachers, and the effect on those with illnesses and disabilities. The clerks of the committee also told me that the story regarding this petition was the most engaged with post on Parliament's Instagram account ever. When the survey was closed, it had, as I say, over 5,000 responses in under 48 hours. Again, clearly, this is an idea which has captured both hearts and minds. I just wanted to read one of the contributions that came in from one of the parents. I think it puts the points very well. This parent tells us, I have 5 teenage children, and it's an absolute nightmare getting them all ready for a 9 a.m. start every day. In order to start school at 9, they have to leave the house at 8 and therefore get up at 6:30, a point which I think echoes the point made by my honourable friend, the member for Stroud. She carries on, I would defy anyone to try and get 5 teenagers out of bed every day at 6:30 and not feel as I do that this is far too early. Having to wake 5 teens at 6:30 each day is like trying to raise the dead. I can see it's not that they don't want to get up, they enjoy and look forward to school, but they genuinely can't get up. Being forced to wake up before they're ready has a massive impact on their health and well-being, which suffers hugely, and moreover, so does mine. The school morning is without question the most stressful time of the day for children and parents. I have some sympathy with that account, and I'm sure others will recognise it too. And in the quantitative response to the questions that were put to people in the survey, the figures are pretty stunning. One of the questions was, how often do you feel drowsy or sleepy during the day? This is not a question for MPs, Mrs. Main, it's a question for teenagers. But more than 85% of teenagers say they often or always felt drowsy or sleepy during the day. And that's a message we should perhaps take seriously. And the next question was, how often have you been bothered by trouble failing or staying asleep or sleeping too much? And 60% were almost often or always troubled by sleepiness. So there's something going on out there that I think we very clearly need to pay attention to. So, Mrs. Main, in conclusion, I hope that I've been able to lay out just some of the arguments made for and against starting the school day later for teenagers, and showing that although some might swiftly dismiss suggestions such as this, when you look into the matter more deeply, it is never as simple as it seems. My conclusion would be that it must be for schools and colleges to make their own decisions, but within a coordinated and organised local framework and with sufficient funding to make it possible. We're currently a long way from either of those. But we're a rich country. It doesn't have to be this way. It is a matter of political choice. And may I finally suggest that time may well be coming soon when such issues really should be addressed by a radical and reforming government. We're living through a world of dramatic technological change, where access to knowledge is more universally available than ever before through every smartphone. The context has changed beyond recognition from only a couple of decades ago, yet our organisational structures for learning remain very much as they were half a century ago. As we learn more about ourselves, how we learn, how we are different at different stages of our lives, why not reform our structures to meet our needs? Why always say it's too difficult? When hundreds of thousands of young people are telling us they want change, perhaps it's time to create a system that works for them, not tell them why it can't be done.
Question is that this House has considered e-petition 229178 relating to secondary school opening hours. I call Mr. John Howell.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and it's a great pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman. And let me say straight away that I think that there is a kernel of truth in what he has said, and that there needs to be more research on it. And I suppose that would be the bottom line of what I'm going to say. So I could stop there, but I want to go on to talk about a couple of things. And I remember George Osborne before he left this place saying that what a fine profession we are, where 9:30 is considered early. And you know, if that's the case for us, then I think that illustrates the point that there is a lot to examine in more detail. When I saw the title of this debate, I was initially sceptical. I too thought that this was a debate that would allow teenagers to stay longer in bed, and would give them more time to stay up late in exchange for that. But actually, if you look at the scientific evidence, and the honourable gentleman has mentioned a lot of that, you do get a different perspective on it. And I mentioned the point that I made in an intervention, that one of the things that needs to be looked at very closely is the amount of screen time that is available, or that a teenager uses, whether that is during the day or particularly at night, just before he or she goes to bed. And I do think that is a very important element, that parents have a large part to play in being able to deal with that. So when I looked at the information on this, the inquiries that I undertook suggested that we ought to have a much broader look at the issues. And I started off by looking at some of the research that had been done in the United States. Now, the United States is a different country, it has different traditions, and it has traditionally started its classes at a much earlier time than we do. It's not unusual for them to start before 8 o'clock in the morning. So there is a lot that can be done there. And one of the things that the US did was conduct a study where they replaced the self-reported information with information that had been obtained from wrist-worn monitors. Now, the importance of that is that, as the Honourable Gentleman has said, a lot of people, when asked how often do you feel tired, will say, yes, I feel tired quite a lot. But if you're wearing wrist monitors that can monitor the amount of sleep that you get and when you begin to drop off, I think that is a much better way of being able to tackle the problem. And I'm aware of one school in Seattle, for example, that delayed its start time from 7:50 to 8:45. So that's actually quite a big time. But in fact, the difficulty that we have there is that what it resulted in was 34 minutes of additional sleep time for teenagers. That's all, 34 minutes. And I have to ask, is that significant? Because one of the other results from this was that it resulted in 2 fewer days missed from school. And it also resulted in 2 fewer absences. Now, that's not a large result to come out of the study. It's not a significant result, I would argue, to come out of the study. And I do think that nevertheless it does indicate a possible solution to this, which is to do more research on it in order to be able to tell where it is going. Now, there are also some very significant aspects to this, in that it appeared also to reduce car accidents. And for teenagers who have I would argue, have a higher risk of car accidents, this is very significant. So there are important societal things at stake here in being able to look at them, rather than simply the amount of time that they have to sleep on this. And the Honourable Gentleman has indicated a potential route for this, particularly for those schools that are academies or free schools. And that is, academies and free schools are free to do what they wish on this. And there should be some local action if people think that this is the right way of going. But I suspect that is not what either the Honourable Gentleman or I wish to see, because there is some difficulty with that in terms that one school may move its start time to, say, 9:30, and another may keep it the same. And that has the big knock-on effects on childminding and things like that the Honourable Gentleman has already illustrated. So I think that there is more that needs to be done to be able to look at this and to be able to do that. Now, maintained schools, of course, it's the local county council that has the responsibility for deciding that, and I suspect that they are not going to be as willing to study the research as indeed academies and free schools are. But just as a little aside on this, I remember from my own school when I was a sixth former that we had a completely different regime for sixth formers than we did for the rest of the school. And sixth formers came in for their particular classes rather than came in to be there all day. And I do think that that flexibility within the system was a very good thing to encourage. It certainly, if I may say so, has done me no harm in being here and being able to participate in this debate. But I do think that more research along those lines would be a very useful thing to see happen, and I would certainly welcome that.
Thank you. And call Martin Day.
Thank you, Mrs Main. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. I suspect the irony that here we are in Parliament debating this issue where we start the working week at 2:30 on a Monday probably hasn't been lost on anyone, and perhaps further emphasised by our slightly later than normal scheduled start time today. However, I'm sure that just adds to the humour of the debate. When I first saw the title of the petition, I did wonder, was it serious? And I think that's a scepticism that the Honourable Member for Henley has already mentioned. And I was fascinated to read through the various research and publication that's been made to realise that actually there's real serious positive ideas here. And I was very grateful for the Honourable Member for Cambridge in opening today's debate to have gone through much of that research in a very even and balanced manner. I think we will all have struck a chord when he quoted the possibility of teenagers being in a different time zone. And I certainly know when my stepson comes to visit, it often feels like that. However, I now have perhaps a greater understanding of the various body clock mechanisms that are going on in the young body. There were 431 signatures from my own constituency for this petition, which makes it the second most popular one in my area, which second only to fireworks, believe it or not. So what is the position in Scotland? Well, just to very quickly recap, the Schools General Scotland's Regulations 1975, as amended, require schools under Education Authority management in Scotland to be open for 190 days per year. They do not define, however, the length of the school week for pupils, which is a matter for the discretion of the education authorities within their responsibility for the day-to-day organisation of the schools. There is, however, a widely accepted norm of 25 hours and 27.5 hours for primary and secondary schools, respectively, and school holiday dates are also, of course, set by the local authorities. The primary focus on any discussion on schools must be on the quality of the education provided, which is why the Scottish Government continues to invest so heavily in education. School spending has risen under the SNP since 2006, with the average spend per pupil has increased by almost 13%, with Scottish spending per pupil being £4,968 in primary and £7,046 in secondary schools in 2016-17. That's an increase in cash terms of at least 12.8% for the primary sector and 13.1% for the secondary sector. Education budgets are rising because the Scottish... Sorry?
About his listing of the amount of money being spent in Scottish education, but the debate is about secondary school opening hours, so I was hoping perhaps we'd get onto that now. Thank you.
No problem. I make the point that it's part of the wider education package, and the timing that are obviously important. So, we've discussed the budgets there briefly, and I will move on to just say, well, what about the proposals for the petition? There is, of course, nothing to stop schools in Scotland from adopting the hours that they wish. And having said that, staff contracts, school transport contracts, various other things may require to change should such changes be introduced. But that's no reason why we shouldn't introduce them. And there's certainly some interesting research behind the petition. The Open University research found that teenagers from 13 to 16 who started their day at 10 a.m. had improved health with 50% less absence. So that's a key factor that might suggest that it's worth looking at other contracts and looking at other times. While on the other hand, we had research from the University of Surrey and Harvard Medical School which suggests that turning down the lights in the evenings would actually be more effective. And using a mathematical model, it has shown that when clocks change in autumn, most teenagers' body clocks would drift even later in response to later start times, and in a matter of weeks would find it just as hard to get out of bed. So there's clearly very reputable research pointing in different directions. So I probably come very much to the conclusion that the Honourable Member for Henley did, that we probably need a bit more research on the matter, but it's certainly issues that we need to keep looking at, which is perhaps brings me to the crux of the argument, and that is more sleep versus better sleep is the real debate. And with some studies suggesting that longer sleep is associated with academic performance, and which better sleep is connected to overall cognitive processing. So there's clearly a balance that needs to be achieved, and I think we would all benefit from seeing more research. But the point I was making earlier when I was mentioning the budgets and the different aspects that come into education is that the quality of education provided has to be the fundamental key to any of this. And what satisfies that criteria best, if the hours affect that, then we should be willing to look at the hours. So I'm certainly keen to see more research, and it's certainly an area that, had I just seen the title of the petition, I might have laughed off, but actually there's a lot of substantive work behind it, and it's something that we need to all look at and see what we can learn from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs Main. A pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today. Can I congratulate the member for Cambridge and the Petitions Committee for moving the petition so eloquently, and also to Hannah Kinder for coming up with the idea for the petition that has attracted so much support in such a space of time. I think she can be very proud indeed that she's made Parliament act on her her ideas, and I want to go into why I think it was so popular in just a few minutes, Mrs Main. Now, on the first reading, many people were dismissed. I think people have made this case today about the debate and that school should start at 10 a.m. because teenagers are too tired. But there is a growing body of opinion that the school day later would be better for teenagers, both in terms of their physical, mental health. And I want to come on to mental health in just a few moments, and in relation to their academic performance. The study I found when researching for this was in 2017, Dr. Paul Kelly of the Open University published a study conducted at an English secondary school which showed that delaying school start times for teenagers can have major benefits, including better academic performance and improved mental and physical health. The study found that rates of illness decreased by more than half over a two-year period, and students in their mid-teens got significantly better grades when they started school at 10 a.m. instead of the usual 8:30. But as been pointed out by many members today, across the world, children are sleeping less. Here in the UK, the NHS is seeing more serious problems than before, with hospital attendance for children under 14 with sleep disorders tripling in the past 10 years. British school children are the 6th most sleep deprived in the world, with American children topping the rankings. There are likely number of sources for this, and this was pointed out quite eloquently by the member for Henley, with the mobile phone and tablet use featuring highly on the list. Over 80% of children in the UK now have their own phone by the age of 12. By 10, 58% have their own tablet, and 2/3 of teenagers say they use the devices within the hour before they go to bed, which is one of my personal rules not to do, as it happens. Now, let's face it, we've all become slaves to these devices, and parents have to be role models and have to set an example in this area. Indeed, the Minister himself made this the focus of attention a few weeks ago by suggesting schools should ban mobile phones altogether, and I think it got rather more attention than he ever thought it might do when he said that. But I think the reason, Mrs Main, so many young people sign this petition is they see mental health going up their agenda, the quality of their mental health. The member for East Falkirk mentioned that we start our day here in Parliament at 2:30 on a Monday, but actually my day started at 9 o'clock with a visit to a company in my constituency called Endress & Hauser, which is a major manufacturer of pressurised equipment across the continent. And interestingly, they were telling me about their workplace practices, about changing times to improve people's mental health and having full staff sessions on anxiety and their mental health well-being. It is a rising agenda. Now, we know that the number of young people attending accident and emergency for a psychiatric condition more than doubled between 2010 and 2015, and I think this is particularly what young people are worried about. Just 8% of the mental health budget is spent on children, despite representing 20% of the population. And interestingly, I think any MP with a constituency caseload have more and more parents coming to see them about special educational needs and trying to get that provision through local authorities or through their multi-academy trust and their CAMS provision. Referrals to CAMS for young people has increased by 64% between 2012-13 and 14-15. More than a quarter of the children and young people referred were not allocated a service. Now, what's hampering schools making change? Well, interestingly today in tests, the government are being criticised about school budgets in particular, about how it leads to less innovation in our schools, particularly today around education technology. But the Minister and I are no strangers to this. It's very difficult for schools in the current climate to make these type of changes, even if it's innovating around the school day, when £1.7 billion has been taken out of the school system since 2015 in real terms. So, schools, as the member for Cambridge has said, every state school is facing a crisis. Now, and schools need an honest approach from government around this. We must act now to give our children and our teenagers the knowledge and confidence to take charge of their own mental health and well-being. On school hours, there is currently autonomy in the school for all schools to organise the day in a way which best suits their pupils in conjunction with the wider community. If schools want to change their times, they have to do it through a framework and through a form of subsidiarity in a local authority area or wider to do it effectively. And I don't think any of us would be adverse that certain countries that make up the United Kingdom or conurbations in Greater Manchester or Merseyside who have their own mayoral systems now, if they want to consider this for the wider benefit, we should see them come back with ideas on this. The subject of the petition today merits proper consideration, Mrs Main, by the Department. In particular, the underlying challenges faced by teenagers and the ability under sustained cuts to budgets in schools and increasing workloads of our schools and teachers to be able to support them. And I once again congratulate the member for Cambridge on his considered introduction of this petition, and Hannah Kinder for bringing this to Parliament and gaining so many signatures, as I said, in such a short space of time.
Thank you very much, Mrs Main. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Cambridge on the way that he introduced this debate. I think we can all agree that every child's experience at school should be a happy one. The government wants them to do well at school and to be alert and receptive to what's being taught. Clearly, ensuring that teenagers are refreshed and ready to work when they arrive at school is hugely important. Now, the e-petition states, blankly, as the Honourable Member for Cambridge said, school should start at 10 a.m. as teenagers are too tired. Now, I share the views of my honourable friend, the member for Henley, and the Honourable Member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk, that at present there is insufficient evidence to suggest that allowing teenagers to start school at 10 a.m. across the board would necessarily be beneficial. A timely start to the school day in secondary school helps to prepare pupils for the world of work after they leave school. Workplaces expect their employees to start and finish work at a set time and to demonstrate the value of hard work and application. Delaying the start of the school day for teenagers may also cause difficulties for working parents, as was acknowledged by the Honourable Member for Cambridge. Parents who have younger children, for example, at primary school, if start times were different from those for siblings at secondary school, and if finishing times were correspondingly different, would present problems for working families, particularly where both spouses are working. Now, the government has high ambitions for all pupils, and we want to encourage and support greater social mobility. We want to ensure that they have excellent opportunities to thrive and to excel. Now, there is broad, though not universal, agreement that teenagers generally need more sleep than they currently get. And while there have been some results showing a benefit from a later start to school, from the United States in particular, where schools typically start significantly earlier than the United Kingdom, The effects of delaying school start times are as yet unproven in the United Kingdom. Research cited by the Honourable Member for Lithgow and East Falkirk, conducted by the University of Surrey and Harvard Medical School in 2017, found that delaying school start times is unlikely to reduce sleep deprivation in teenagers. The results, so the research predicts that turning down the lights in the evening would be much more effective at tackling sleep deprivation. The research went on to say, and I quote, "The mathematical model showed that delaying school start times in the UK would not help reduce sleep deprivation. Just as when clocks go back in the autumn, most teenagers' body clocks would drift even later in response to the later start time, and in a matter of weeks they would find it just as hard to get out of bed. The results did, however, lend some support to delaying school start in the United States, where many schools start as early as 7 a.m. And it went on to say that the mathematical model shows that the problem for adolescents is that their light consumption behaviour interferes with the natural interaction with the environmental clock. Getting up late in the morning results in adolescents keeping the lights on until later at night. Having the lights on late delays the biological clock, making it even harder to get up in the morning. The mathematics also suggests that the biological clocks of adolescents are particularly sensitive to the effects of light consumption." And it goes on to say, finally, Mrs. May, and I quote, "The model suggests that an alternative remedy to moving school start times in the UK is exposure to bright light during the day, turning the lights down in the evening and off at night." Now, a further study, Mrs. Main, the Teen Sleep Project, is looking at adolescent sleeping patterns and the impact of sleep education on teenage students. Professor Foster from the project says, and I quote, "Our pilot study showed that about 25% of teenagers had clinically poor sleep. Can we justify late starts when it might only benefit 25% of students?" he said. Instead, he said, "We must introduce sleep education with parents, teachers and students. We are not ruling out a later school start, but we need a good set of data to show this is having a huge impact on adolescents. Unless later starts are combined with sleep education, it may actually worsen the issue." So that was the conclusion of the Teen Sleep Project, and it tallies very much with what my honourable friend for Henley and the honourable member for Linlithgow were saying. Now, the government welcomes the Chief Medical Officer's report into screen time, which was published on the 7th of February. The report includes advice on managing screen time and social media use in a sensible and effective way. And the report is clear that scientific research is currently insufficiently conclusive to support UK CMO evidence-based guidelines on optimal amounts of screen use or online activities such as social media use. But the report provides advice for parents and carers based on child development research, including leaving phones outside the bedroom at night time or taking screen-free mealtime, something I'm sure the honourable member from East Swindonshaw also does. Now, we have recently consulted on the draft regulations and guidance for the relationships education and relationships and sex education and health education. Now, the guidance sets out the content for the subject, including health and prevention. Pupils should know, in the guidance, it says, the importance of sufficient, good quality sleep to promote good health, and that a lack of sleep can affect weight, mood, and their ability to learn. Teachers should make sure that pupils are aware of the benefits of physical activity and time spent outdoors, which should be linked to information on the benefits of sufficient sleep and good nutrition. And good mental health, Mrs. Main, is a priority for the department and for the government. It can have a profound impact on the whole of a child's life, not just their attainment. Schools and colleges have an important role to play in supporting the mental health and well-being of children and young people by putting in place whole school approaches tailored to the particular needs of their pupils and students. Now, the decision on when to start the day lies, of course, with individual schools, as I think was pointed out by the honourable member. All schools have the flexibility to decide when their school day should start and finish, and most schools start their days at 9 o'clock or earlier. That's not to say that a later start time can never work, and some schools have made the decision to begin their school day later. Monk Seaton High School in North Tyneside trialled a 10 a.m. start, but the school has since reverted back to an 8:55 a.m. start. In 2011, we revoked the regulations which prescribed the procedure that had to be followed in order to change school opening times. And this means that since then, maintained schools have had the autonomy to change their own school opening times, as well as, of course, academies. The Education, School Day and School Year England regulations, 1999, require all maintained schools to be open to educate their pupils for at least 380 sessions, that's 190 days, in each school year. The regulations require that every school day must consist of 2 sessions separated by a break in the middle of the day. Academies and free schools are not bound by these regulations, but their funding agreements do state that the duration of the school day is the responsibility of the trust. Now, there are no specific legal requirements about how long the school day should be. Governing bodies of maintained schools are responsible for deciding when sessions should begin and end on each school day, as well as deciding the length of each lesson and the timings for the morning sessions, the midday break, and afternoon sessions. And the governing body has the power to revise the length of the school day as it sees fit. Now, schools also have the responsibility for setting the timetable for their school day so they can make the decision to schedule, for example, more intellectually challenging subjects later in the day if they decide that that is when their students are more receptive to being taught. Now, schools also have the autonomy to extend the length of the school day or offer provision after the end of the school day if they believe that it would be beneficial to their students. Now, extending the school day or offering extra education activities around the school day can help children, particularly from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, to improve attainment, to improve social skills, raise aspirations, and also help parents with childcare. And where schools make changes to the length of their school day, we would expect them to act reasonably when making those decisions, including consulting parents and giving parents notice and considering the impact of those affected, including pupils, the teachers, of course, and parents' work commitments and childcare options. Schools should also consider the impact of reducing students' time in schools. And our evidence shows that every extra day of school missed can affect a pupil's chances of achieving good GCSEs, which has a lasting effect. Now, I am grateful to the Honourable Member for highlighting this issue this afternoon. The government can't and shouldn't insist that schools delay the start time of the day. Schools already have the power to do this themselves, as I've said, and they should feel that it would be, if they feel, of course, that it would be in the best interest of their pupils. And that is a key point. Schools know what is best, what is in the best interest of their pupils, and are best placed to make a decision on whether to make changes to the content, the structure and duration of their school day to get the best outcomes for their pupils. They know the individual circumstances of their pupils and of the local area, and we wouldn't want to take away the freedom of any school by requiring them to start the school day at a set time, especially when evidence on delaying school start times in the United Kingdom is at best inconclusive. So the focus, I'll give way to my final paragraph, but I will give way to the Honourable Member.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And I've listened intently throughout his speech, and he's absolutely right about the lack of evidence, both in terms of delaying the start times, but also the finish times. And as I was saying earlier about the British Medical Journal's research in terms of young people and their likelihood to be stabbed in terms of violence, and the lack of evidence around that. So I wonder whether or not the Minister will commit now to looking into getting more research in terms of the delaying of the start times, but also the delaying of finishing times within schools to make sure our kids are kept safe.
Well, I'm influenced by the issue of the staggered end times of schools. This is the BMJ research the Honourable Lady was citing, and of course that really feeds into the issue of the autonomy that the schools do have to decide when schools can start and when they can finish. And of course we trust head teachers to make those decisions, which will be based very much on the local circumstances of when the other schools in the area finish their school day and so on. So I think that we're always open to more research being conducted on these issues, and we certainly want to make sure that children are safe when they are leaving school and walking to and from home in the evenings. Now, just to finish, Mrs. Main, just to say that the focus should be on ensuring that children and young people do understand the importance of sleep and how best to get sufficient sleep at night to enable them to achieve their best.
Daniel Zeichner, Mr. Wind-up.
Thank you very much, Mrs Main, and I'm grateful to all the members for their contributions this afternoon. And I think a consistent feature of the contributions has been the call for more evidence. I sometimes think that people call for more evidence when they don't necessarily like what they're hearing from the evidence that's already there. And it does seem to me that the strength of feeling that's come forward from young people in this country through the petition that's been so admirably put forward does bear some thinking about. I think actually there is plenty of evidence to show, particularly from the Open University study, that there is a real potential educational gain here. And I would think that for some schools and colleges, they might want to seize that opportunity. But I'm always mindful of the issue of what level these decisions are taken. I remember in the early days of the Labour government after '97, when there was a discussion about a ban on smoking in public places. Tony Blair coming to a Labour event saying, well, maybe we'll leave it to local councils to decide, because he was a bit nervous about taking that decision. And what we said was, well, it needs leadership. And in the end, he did it, and no one thinks it controversial now. And I would say that the evidence shows that it's very hard for local schools and colleges to take this decision on their own. I think it needs some leadership. So I'm hopeful that at some point in the future, we'll have a government that actually has the courage to listen to our teenagers and actually act on what they're telling us and find the evidence to back it up, Mrs May.
The question is that this House has considered e-petition 229178 relating to secondary school opening hours. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order.